In a country already bruised by corruption fatigue, one allegation landed like a thunderclap. A senior police figure, Julius Mkhwanazi, named in sworn claims linking him to cash flows from controversial businessman kaZwelithini, including payments allegedly covering children's school fees. It wasn't the money alone that froze the room. It was the intimacy of the claim. School fees are not abstract numbers. They touch family, vulnerability, and trust. When power and private obligation collide, the line between service and self-interest blurs fast. The T's tightened immediately. If these claims are true, they don't describe a single bad decision. They sketch a system where favors travel quietly, where invoices become shields, and where influence hides behind ordinary expenses. The question isn't only who paid what, but why such payments would ever be acceptable in the orbit of law enforcement leadership. And the most unsettling promise of this story is not a smoking gun, but a paper trail. Before the details settle, pause on the engagement spark that has gripped the public imagination. If someone pays your most personal bills, do they own a piece of your judgment? Think about it honestly, because this story asks every listener to decide where loyalty ends and duty begins, and whether silence can ever be neutral. The narrative opens with the setting. South Africa's policing environment has lived under intense scrutiny, commissions, leaks, and testimony stacking like files on a desk that never gets cleared. In that atmosphere, any allegation against a senior officer is oxygen to a wildfire. The claims around Mkhwanazi didn't arrive as gossip. They arrived framed as statements, names, amounts, dates. Not proof, but not whispers either. And that distinction matters. Then comes kaZwelithini, a name already heavy with controversy. Business dealings linked to state contracts, political proximity, and past disputes made him a familiar figure long before these allegations surfaced. When a person like that appears in a financial relationship with a police leader, the public instinctively leans forward. Power recognizes power. That's the first uncomfortable truth. The story deepens as the alleged payments are described not as luxury indulgences but as routine obligations. School fees. The ordinariness is what stings. Corruption often hides behind extravagance. This claim hides behind responsibility. It suggests a normalization of dependency, where help becomes habit and habit becomes leverage. Quiet leverage is the most effective kind. As the allegations circulated, defenders rushed to emphasize presumption of innocence, and they are right to do so. Allegations are not convictions, but accountability doesn't begin at sentencing. It begins at explanation. When public servants face claims that strike at independence, transparency becomes the minimum currency. Silence, in moments like this, speaks louder than denial. Another layer emerges with internal dynamics. Senior officers do not operate alone. Decisions ripple through command structures, influence postings, shape investigations. If even the perception exists that money can soften judgment, every case touched by that office becomes suspect. Justice depends not only on fairness but on the belief in fairness. Once belief cracks, outcomes crumble. Consider the timing. These claims surfaced amid broader institutional soul-searching, when commissions were already interrogating procurement, patronage, and protection networks. In that context, the allegations didn't feel isolated. They felt patterned. Patterns are what investigators chase, because patterns turn stories into systems. Listen to how the language around the claims evolved. At first it was support, then assistance, then payments. Each word shifts weight. Language is a corridor where truth walks slowly, changing shoes as it goes. By the time school fees entered the conversation, the corridor narrowed. There's no neutral spin on someone else paying for your children's education when you wield coercive power. The eighth movement in this opening arc centers on credibility. Who benefits from these claims? Who risks the most by making them? Motive analysis doesn't prove truth, but it tests plausibility. Whistleblowers rarely choose comfort. They choose disruption, and disruption is expensive. The story then turns, entering the next stretch with heightened tension. Attention moves from personalities to process. How are such allegations examined? Which units have jurisdiction? What safeguards exist to prevent interference when the subject is powerful? These questions matter because justice cannot investigate itself in the mirror. We confront the uncomfortable reality that internal investigations often stall not from lack of evidence but from procedural paralysis. Files move slowly. Requests multiply. Time becomes a solvent. In corruption cases, delay is not neutral. Delay is strategy. And the public has learned to read the calendar like a verdict. As pressure mounts, public statements become careful, almost surgical. Words are chosen to minimize exposure. No admissions, no outright refutations. Just respect for process. Process is vital, but when invoked without milestones, it feels like fog. Fog protects those who know the road. Another dimension surfaces: political proximity. When businessmen, officers, and politicians share social spaces, favors don't need contracts. They need understanding. That's why the school fees allegation resonated so deeply. It suggests a relationship that outlives transactions. Relationships are harder to audit than invoices. Midway through this stretch, analysts begin revisiting old cases linked to the office. Patterns are re-examined. Decisions once defended as discretion are now viewed through a different lens. This is how allegations expand. Not by adding facts, but by reinterpreting history. The media's role intensifies. Some outlets chase speed, others chase corroboration. The public learns again that narratives race ahead of evidence. Yet without media pressure, many investigations never ignite. This tension between caution and urgency defines accountability in real time. Then comes the human cost. Families of officers, families of victims, ordinary citizens who want to trust the badge. Allegations don't land in a vacuum. They land in living rooms. When the claim involves children's school fees, it cuts across class lines. Education is aspiration. Using it as alleged leverage feels especially corrosive. The 14th movement examines denials and non-denials. Legal teams emphasize that support between acquaintances is not illegal per se. That is true in the abstract, but public service ethics operate beyond criminal thresholds. They operate in the realm of influence, appearance, and duty. That realm is unforgiving. As scrutiny deepens, whispers of documentation surface: bank records, messages, schedules. None confirmed publicly, but enough to keep attention fixed. Corruption stories rarely explode, they drip. Each drip keeps the floor wet. The next shift explores institutional response. Oversight bodies signal readiness. Committees request briefings. Timelines are promised. This choreography is familiar. The question is whether the dance ends in daylight or dusk. By the 16th passage, fatigue threatens. Audiences have seen this movie before. Allegation, outrage, inquiry, delay. What keeps this story alive is specificity. Names, purposes, fees. Specificity is the enemy of denial. The 17th movement slows the pace, inviting reflection. If the allegations are false, reputations are being damaged and trust eroded unfairly. If they are true, the implications are severe, reaching far beyond one individual. Either way, clarity is owed. Ambiguity benefits no one except those comfortable in shadows. Then the 18th surge arrives, tightening everything into a single knot. Accountability is not vengeance. It is verification. It asks for facts, tested openly without fear or favor. When power resists that test, suspicion hardens into belief. The final stretch does not resolve the story. It frames the ending we are waiting for. Institutions must decide whether they exist to protect roles or principles. The public must decide whether to demand conclusions or accept process without endpoints. And the individuals named must decide whether silence shields them or sinks them. This is where the narrative rests, not with a verdict, but with a challenge hanging in the air. Allegations about bribes, about school fees, about